Um, after the national crisis of 2001, of uh, the attack on the World Trade Center and the 3,000 deaths and all that stuff, which happened right here in New York across the river from where I live in Brooklyn. Um, at that time, that was 1991. Am I right? Was that? No, 2001, right? I'm getting to the age where I forget how long ago things were. So one of the things that was interesting after that happened was it generated a lot of conflict, not just between the U.S. and, forces in other parts of the world, but between people in the U.S. It generated lots of conflict over, what should be done, over who was responsible. There were a lot of specifically anti-Muslim sentiments expressed. There was a lot of confusion and anger and hurt and lots of stuff. And one interesting thing that came out of that was that those of us who were already working in this field at that time found it astonishing that no one contacted us to talk about what should we do about all of the conflict and dysfunction that these terrible events have given rise to within our own society. It was as though we didn't exist. So this was in 2001. The mediation field in its modern incarnation, particularly with the birth of community mediation centers like the one that you guys have down there, Dusty and Vicky and John. And I think, John Wharton, you're also involved in that, aren't you? Are you not? No. Okay. I thought I remembered you from that too.
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. But all of that began in the late 1960s and with even greater force in the 1970s until by 1980, when I started teaching this at the law school level, there were hundreds of these mediation centers all over the country. There were thousands of people trained and conducting mediations. It was a major thing. It was astonishing that 20 years after that, when there was a crisis in the country that surfaced all kinds of intra community conflict, no one literally thought to call upon any of the people who were doing this. So that a wonderful woman here in New York, whose name, and some of you may belong to this listserv, which is something like the NYC-DR listserv, New York City Dispute Resolution, was started by a woman named Maria Volpe, a colleague of mine at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. And this was the basis for it, that, what happened? The world didn't even know we existed. What are we doing wrong? What are we not doing right to, talk to people and let them know we're here? Let me put it in a different way. How is it possible that after 25 years or more of doing community mediations all over the country, which must have touched the lives of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people as parties and as volunteer mediators, nevertheless, it seemed as though after 2001, none of those hundreds of thousands of people spoke up to anybody and said, hey, we're here. Maybe we can help. None of the government officials who did whatever they did then apparently were acquainted with the work that we were all doing and thought that it might be helpful to contact us and ask for assistance. It was as though we were sort of over here in a little bubble apart from the rest of society, even though we'd been working with hundreds of thousands of people for over 2 decades, 2.5, 3 decades. And so she started this listserv. I don't know if any of you go on it. You certainly can Google it and subscribe to it. It's very interesting. Some of the stuff that goes on there leaves me completely cold, but a lot of it is very interesting and very engaging there must be, I would say, probably, if not thousands, hundreds and hundreds of people on that listserv who regularly read it and contribute to it and so on. But here we are, 25 years later, or whatever this is, 25 years, no, 20 years later, after 2001. And again, the same phenomenon is happening. There's conflict all over this country right now. Not because of something that somebody came in and did from the outside, but because of lots of fissures and gaps and chasms that have been opened up over the last numbers of years. And to the extent that, it's a lucky thing that people can't go and have Thanksgiving and Christmas and other family holidays together because nobody could sit at the same table and talk to each other without getting into a fight. So we're being saved from each other, basically. But again, it's like we don't exist. So that was really, for me, the motivation for trying to, I'm not an op-ed writer. This isn't the kind of writing I do. Whatever, a scholar, a commentator, I write books, I write scholarly articles, I write in, chunks, paragraphs, pages. And to write something in 650 words, but I felt like it has to be put out there not to mediate.com. Mediate.com is like we're talking to each other. Who cares? Everybody knows what everybody knows. But why doesn't the world know anything about us? So I thought I have to try to do what I'm really not very good at doing, writing something short and sweet, hopefully, to penetrate into a general audience. Maybe it'll affect people, maybe it won't. But if I don't do anything like that, then it's like the thing we used to say after Vietnam. What did you do in the war, Daddy? I don't know. I sat home and wrote a scholarly article that nobody read. Maybe it will make a difference. So the question can be looked at from a number of perspectives. Another perspective is to say, why didn't all those people who were parties to mediation over all those years and decades, why didn't they themselves think, hey, this is what needs to happen. This is what I need to talk to whoever it is that I need to talk to about at the highest levels. Let them open up their eyes and ears and see that we have people doing something called mediation that can actually bring people together. Why didn't people write those emails to their congresspersons and their mayors and so on right away? Now, my answer to that question is because, and I think there's plenty of research, unfortunately, to support this, which goes a little bit to the point that Dan made about why it's wonderful that you're learning the mediation process from him and from others who practice this approach we call transformative mediation. I could also call it a different name. That we chose that name, good or bad. Client-centered mediation is what I like to call it now. Party-directed mediation is what I like to call it now. And you're lucky that you're learning that. Because I think the other reason that people haven't gravitated to endorsing and encouraging and begging the policymakers to employ these kinds of processes to help people talk and connect with each other over the kinds of polarized divides that exist more and more is that mediation hasn't done that. The kind of mediation that's been done, by and large, for the last not even 25, 35, 40 years. I opened a mediation center in San Francisco in 1976. I learned about it in law school in 1972. That's closer to 50 years. The kind of mediation that's been done over these last 4 to 5 decades has very little to do with what you're learning in this session that you're attending right now. Instead, it's just like Dan said, that kind of mediation was people telling other people what to do and treating them as though, without your help, without our help as experts, they would be lost. Because basically the premise behind all that work that was done, or the vast majority of it, was that the human beings who come into our centers and offices as mediators are dangerous, dangerous to themselves and dangerous to each other. They are incapable of taking care of themselves, making good decisions for themselves, and they're even more incapable of opening up to and listening to each other and appreciating each other. So in other words, these human beings that we, that are our clients, we think very little. Our opinion of them is very low. They have neither the capacity for self-determination nor the capacity for recognition of others. They're basically frightened and confused and helpless and often hateful people. And therefore, we have to come in and straighten them out. We have to take care of them and make sure they take care of themselves and make sure that they then reach out to each other. Well, you know something? That's why the repeat caseload of mediators, whether in mediation centers or otherwise, is minuscule. Why should I go back? I could get the same thing in small claims court. I could get the same thing from a lawyer. Why should I go back? This is nothing new. This is nothing different. They said they were going to give me something different, but they didn't. And why do I need these, fancy schmancy people with degrees and professions and whatever else telling me what to do? I don't think people really cared much for what they got from mediators. And by the way, all the research shows that and shows that that's why people don't go back. So if we want to know why didn't people come to us and raise a storm on behalf of mediation now, it's because the product that we provided, the service that we provided, largely, not exclusively. I mean, I'm a pretty critical person. You probably could tell that already, but I don't want to dismiss everything. But on the whole, the service we provided was not unique. It was not new. It was not revolutionary. And it was not something that people really needed. What did they need? They needed, as Dan said, that's our mantra, that's our slogan. They needed support. They needed people who could help them by supporting what they were doing in talking to each other and making decisions and thinking about stuff, and not supplant them, not push them out of the way and tell them what to do. That's what people needed, and that's what people wanted. And that's what mediation, by and large, could have given them and never did. And I'm as guilty as the other person, because the mediation center that I ran in San Francisco did exactly that, like most others. And it wasn't until I got involved in running a mediation clinic as a law school teacher at another mediation center in New York with my partner, Joe Folger, that I stumbled onto the realization that what we'd been doing was not really all that helpful to people, and that we didn't have to treat people as helpless and hateful, because they weren't, because our clients had the right stuff, quote unquote. We just had to know and figure out how to support them in realizing and exercising their capacity for taking care of themselves and each other. And we've been working at figuring out how to do that for the last 20 years. We still haven't made much of a dent. Otherwise, people would be flocking to Dan's door and my door and Dusty's door and Vicky's door. I hope they're coming, but I don't think they're flocking. I don't think the governor is calling you and saying, please come and tell me how to do this. I don't think that anybody in the transition team in the Biden camp is coming to anybody who knows anything about this. Why shouldn't they be? Because they don't know we're here, and because we haven't been doing it. So my op-ed piece was a cry, a light in the darkness, I hope, a cry in the wilderness. Hey, hello, there's something else here that could be helpful if you listen. I hope somebody does. But whether or not somebody out there listens, at least we have to listen. We have to do something that truly lives up to what we called the promise of mediation. And that promise is not, experts marching into the room and telling people how to run their lives and how to fix their problems. That promise is in knowing that people have what it takes. They've lost for the moment those capacities, because conflict is a very difficult thing and saps our inherent capacities for strength and compassion, but it just does it temporarily. People are resilient. They come back to it. They come back to their capacities. They come back to their decency. They come back to their humanity. And when they don't, and they need help, the help that they need is supporting what's already there and not jamming their heads together, twisting their arms, or any of the other metaphors, or even solving their problems. So, you are learning something which, in my opinion, is desperately, desperately needed in our society and are really everywhere. I mean, in our introduction to our first book, we said our interest in mediation is not just as a conflict resolution process, which anyway, we're not that interested in resolution per se. Our interest is in mediation as a social movement, as a societal development. And it has that potential. And that's what makes it interesting. If it had just been, resolving conflicts, then like Dan, I would have lost my interest in this long ago. I've been interested in it since I graduated from law school in 1974, and even before that. So that's over, I don't know, I don't add very well, but I think that's about 45 years. Nothing could have held my interest, and not just interest, but passion for that's more than half of my life. And I'm still interested in it. I still believe that something good is happening here, and that ultimately it's the kind of good that can really reshape our society without setting us at each other's throats. On the contrary, by helping us to understand each other. And even where we can't agree, like we've taken to this slogan now, living with no. It's not getting to yes. There's a lot of things that there's never going to be getting to yes about. But living with no is just as important. And we know how to help people do that. We absolutely know how to help people do that. We have to, bring the world to us.